Hello, thank you so much for attending the Career Change webinar. We are here to talk through the 4 steps that you need to make a career change. The first is calculating your budget, deciding how much of a big change you want to make, identifying an area of interest that is in demand in the market, and making a learning plan that fits your goals. I'm Randall, and I'm going to be hosting the webinar today. We're kind of switching things up. And I'm interviewing our special guest, Ada Bernier. Ada is the founder and CEO of Skill Crush, where we teach women tech skills to change their careers and lives.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. I'm super excited that Randall is interviewing me for once. Woohoo! Randall is one of our awesome team members here at Skill Crush, and I'm super excited that she's joining us. And if you guys have been around for a while, Randall did another webinar with us a couple months ago. But anyways, yeah, so today we're going to be talking all about, making a career change and figuring out what the best way to do that. And that's exactly why I created Skill Crush, was to help people through that process and sort of teach everything that I've learned and then also source from all the wisest people in the world. So, yeah, couldn't be more excited.
Cool. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Throughout the webinar today, we're going to ask you to share thoughts and questions. If you could please do that on our Skill Crush Facebook page or in the comments function on the Google Hangout page for this webinar, then we'll see them and answer them later.
There's also a Q&A module, so people can.
Okay.
Yes.
Also, if you could have either a pen and paper ready or a doc open on your computer, because we'll ask you to jot a few things down. Good work, Ada. So let's just get started by having you all share something in the comments. Before we really dig into it, I want you to tell me if any of these apply to you. Do you ever wish you could start a more interesting and exciting career that pays the bills also? Have you ever wanted to leave your job but had no idea how to start plotting for a new job? And have you ever thought about getting more training to move into a new job or make more money, but you have no idea where to get that training or who to trust for it? So maybe you're saying yes to all of these questions or maybe just a couple of them, but tell us in the comments. I'll start by saying that I have experienced all of those feelings pretty recently. I did English in college, and then I got a graduate degree in English, and then I realized there weren't any jobs in that. So I moved to the middle of Texas to run a restaurant, but then I was bored, and I couldn't find any high-paying jobs that fit my education level. So my big story is that I decided to learn more about tech. I took my first HTML and CSS class in September 2013 with Skill Crush. Within a few months, I'd made back my investment, and it's been a little more than a year now, and I have a fulfilling job that is lucrative and challenging. So, Ada, why don't you just start by telling us if you've ever been in any of those situations?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think also I just want to point out that I think there's a couple things that you're going to see that Randall did that I think that we can all learn from, in that, yes, Randall had this very fancy education, a master's degree in English, and then wasn't finding any work that she found interesting, and then she sort of thought about, well, maybe there's a skill I can get that I can couple with this education that I have to really kind of change my career path. So I think I had a very similar experience. I also was a liberal arts major. I graduated with a degree in African American Studies and fine art photography. So not really related to tech at all. I get that question a lot. Were you a computer science major? And I'm like, no, unfortunately I wasn't. Or fortunately, I mean, I had a great time in college, so I'm not complaining. But it's funny, like, it didn't even occur to me in college to think about something like that, because I really, at the time, and I think this is the case for a lot of people, like, I really did not make the connection between sort of like any sort of creative pursuit and computer science. And I think there's a reason for that. I think a lot of the way that computer science is taught isn't so creative. So I graduated, I moved to New York like any aspiring artist would do, and I took some odd jobs. I was working as a photography assistant to two photographers. And then basically I learned that that wasn't that was, a hard way to make a living, basically. It was glamorous, maybe a little bit, kind of, not really, but didn't pay well, wasn't regular, it had no benefits, no stability. I mean, it was just, all of those things. So I was looking for something else, and I sort of stumbled into a photo editing position at an online magazine, and that was really where I started my career in tech. And I think that's a really good example of how, you can have sort of these creative this background in the creative arts or writing or something along those lines, and it could end up being very applicable to work that you're doing that's more techie, quote unquote. So I was a photo editor for a while, and then I decided that I really, really liked working in tech, and I found it incredibly creative, and I loved that I could make something and lots of people could see it. And so I went and then got a job as a project manager. That was sort of my next more techie role that I took. And then if you guys have read any of the Skill Crush stuff, you'll know what happened next. And what happened was that I was at the job for 7 weeks and I got laid off. And when I got laid off, they basically decimated every non-technical department at the company. So they took the strategy department and they fired everyone except for one strategist. They took all the copywriters and fired them. They took all the project managers except for 2 or 3 maybe and laid them off, and just really didn't lay off any lay off any technical people, except for there was one guy. So I really felt like, at that moment I was like, okay, the writing's on the wall. Like, I'm a smart person and I have a lot to contribute, but because I don't have a skill, a hard skill that I can point to, I'm being let go. So that was sort of a wake-up call for me.
So it can be, I feel like it's always really inspiring to hear your story, Ada, but then whenever people try to put that into action, it's like, okay, wait, what do I do first if I want to make a change like that? So why don't you talk us through the very first thing you should do if you're thinking about changing careers?
Yeah, so I think, it is a really hard process. I think that everyone who is sort of starting to think about this now, like, I think just in the last couple of years, so this happened to me 5 years ago, and the difference in sort of the world and like the opportunities to learn now versus 5 years ago is unbelievable. And you should thank your lucky stars that you are coming to this thought process now, because there's so much information out there and so many people who are wanting to help you that I wish I could have had. But I think that, when I look back at sort of what has been the key to my success, both like in learning a new skill and then taking that skill and starting to make money with it, and then becoming, sort of launching a freelance career and then building that into a business and then building that business into Skill Crush eventually. I really think it is about, you have to think about like what it is the market wants. Mm-hmm. And I know that's a really vague thing to say, but I think that a big kind of aha moment for me was when I kind of was pushed up against the wall, right? Like I had gotten laid off and I had no money and I had an apartment I had to pay for, and of course I had made the rookie mistake of getting a new job with a higher salary and getting a more expensive apartment and therefore increasing my cost of living. And so, and it was kind of one of those things where I was like, okay, like I really can't, I had to let go of this dream I had of being like, what do I want to do? Who will pay me to do that thing? And start to think about it like, well, what do people need? Like, what do people need help with that I could do, that I find interesting enough that I'd be willing to learn more about it? And just really start, and it's funny because it's like, I say that now and I'm like, oh, I guess that kind of sounds sucky, but at the same time, like, now, from my perspective, it's like, I want to, like, especially when you're running a business, like, all you want is to create something that other people value and want, and you really realize that that's what's most important. So it's really shifted, like my whole perspective about this has shifted away from what is it that I want to do and me, and what is it that they want. Like, what is it that employers want? What is it that customers want? What is it that consumers want? and the value in being useful. Like I don't know. I mean, I want to be useful and helpful. So.
Yeah. So, and it also kind of sounds like for you wait, can you see me?
Yes.
When you got laid off, it became basically a question of money. So I think a lot of people can start with that. Like, I have all these dreams, but I also just need a paycheck. So I'm going to kind of ask all of our viewers to go through a little exercise with us. And I think the first thing that you can do to get started thinking about what kind of career change is going to work for you is to figure out a really basic thing. How much money do you actually need to live on? So that just means working backwards from your expenses, which seems really basic, but at least for me, when I just put that together, I was really surprised by how much I needed to just pay bills. So our designer at Skill Crush, Christina, she put together this really great guide to setting your rates for freelance work. But the first part of that guide is all about figuring out what your budget is and how much money you need to make. So after the webinar, we'll send that out to everyone watching so you can see it in full. But for now, I want you to just jot down on your paper your major expenses just so you can have that idea in your head. So Christina talks about listing all the big things, like not just your mortgage and your car payment, but your gym membership, everything like that. For now, just jot down the big ones. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Okay, so I think most people have a general idea of how much their mortgage is, but keep that number in mind as we keep going, and you can multiply that by 12, and that's kind of the ballpark you're looking in. And most of us want to do more than just get by, so think about that too. You can, if you want to make a little bit more money, add that to your goal, and then you can try to find jobs out there that have salaries at that level.
Yeah, and I think it's also good to remember that like you'll work up to it. So if the number seems really, really big and scary and intimidating, don't get worried, because I think that your income can rise really, really quickly once you get going.
Yeah. Okay, so if you have an idea of what budget you're working at, the next step is figuring out what you actually want to do, or how big of a change you want to make. So, Ada, it sounds like you just made a really massive change. I mean, the decision was made for you, right? Like, you got laid off, and now it's time to either try to get the same kind of job and maybe have the same thing happen again, or just make a big change. But some people might want to supplement their income with work on the side, maybe freelancing, or they might want to try to take on a different role in their current job. So if you guys still have your pen and paper out, I want you to think about that for a second and jot down what kind of career change you're thinking of. How drastic is this? Do you want to be in a completely new job, a completely new company in a new field, or do you maybe want to be building WordPress sites on the side? So just take a couple seconds, whatever comes to your mind first.
Yeah, it's sort of the anywhere but here, or are you sort of looking to explore different opportunities?
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. I mean, it was like, it felt terrible at the time. Getting laid off is not fun for anybody, but it was a blessing in disguise. I was, that's true in retrospect.
Yeah. Okay. So, Ada, I know you kind of got into this already about getting into an area that's in demand, but why don't we just talk through that a little bit more? Is there a way to do what you really love doing and do something that's in demand?
I think so, absolutely. I think there's two levels of it. I listened to a really good podcast interview with the woman who started a company called Dermalogica, and I don't know if you guys in the audience are familiar with that, but it is a face wash, sort of like face lotion. Is that fair characterization of it? Cosmetics company, and she was saying that she grew up with a single mom who had sort of, her parents got divorced, and her mom was left taking care of her 4 daughters and had to re-enter the workforce a little bit later in life, I guess, and coached her daughters, like always said to her daughters, you have to find a skill that you can rely on if things head south. And so this woman who is the CEO of this company that's huge and does millions and millions of dollars was saying to this interviewer, she goes, and that's why I learned to do bikini waxes. And if everything fell apart tomorrow, like I would just walk up and down the street to all the salons and I'd be doing a bikini wax by 9:30 a.m. on Monday morning. And it was so funny because I was like, that's ridiculous. You started this huge company that's $250 million a year. Like, I believe that somebody would be happy to pay you lots of money to help them, with their business. But I thought that the spirit of what she was saying was so on point. And I think it's like what you want to look for. It's not the like I'll do anything for money, but it's sort of like you want to find that sort of Venn diagram cross section of this is something that I find like at least somewhat interesting and is really valuable, and start there. And then I think it's about taking that skill and figuring out how to make it work for you. Because like granted, like today I get to use my coding skills to do exactly what I want because I run this business. So I'm actually like doing I've like maxed out what is it that I want to do. So I don't think it's about personal sacrifice in the long term, but I think that in the short term when you're first thinking about it, it might seem that way a little bit because you're like, well, I really want to paint all day. It's like, okay, well, so that's not going to work for you right away. Maybe someday. In the meantime, like is building websites, for example, like is that palatable?
Yeah.
And somewhat interesting and.
And I think there's a way it can kind of sneak up on you if you start doing what you see as in demand. Like just to touch on an example from my life. So I started getting into tech because I just had this feeling that it was in demand, and I saw all the stats, and it seemed really important. And I just thought, now or never, I need to get into this or not get into it. But I mean, what I really loved doing was writing and reading, but I realized even if I wanted to be a college professor, there weren't very many jobs for me to do that. Just at, 22 years old, walk in to a job and just say I want to write and read for my job and get paid enough to live on. But so I started doing all this work in tech, and at first it was like, this isn't my interest area, I'm just adding another thing. But not even a year later, and I already get to combine my tech knowledge with writing by doing content for websites. So I think pretty quickly you can find a way to sneak what you like doing into the skills that are in demand.
I totally agree. And the positive side too, I think, and this is very much your experience, is that you can also get paid to learn the skills. So you don't have to necessarily take a lot of the risk on yourself.
Definitely. So I want to go back to everybody who's watching, and you guys have written down a general idea of your budget and how big of a career change you want to make. So just off the top of your head, I want you to list 5 things you're interested in, and they could be really big, like art or math, like yoga or local water supply. So just take a second to do that.
If you can help people in California with that right now,
yeah,
very valuable.
That's in demand.
Yeah.
Okay, so now if you have a quick list you've jotted down, I want you to list 3 to 5 things that you think are in demand right now, just the first things that come to your mind.
Yeah, what kind of skills people are hiring for.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even, skills that you specifically don't have, but think that people are hiring for.
Yeah. So I think that you've got all this stuff written down, and it might not be clear to you right away, but I think that after the webinar you can sit down and look at that list and find something that matches up, where you can see a spot where your interest is going to line up with something that's in demand, or at least you can make it line up eventually, and that will help you choose what in-demand skills you need to start learning first. So, Ada, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. 1 second, sorry. So I think that as you are approaching this, um, the next step is that you want to just start thinking about your budget and sort of both budget and time and space.
Yeah. So if you figured out you have all these big ideas about what you want to do next, then it's time to get more concrete. Like, okay, I've decided I want to learn JavaScript. What am I going to do next? Just for an example. So there are a ton of classes and workshops and online learning resources out there, which is really good. I mean, even in the last 5 years, it seems like it's just grown so much what you can learn online or without going back to a 4-year college or something. But can you help us a little bit to narrow it down? If someone has decided what skill they want to learn, how are they going to choose where to learn it?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting about the moment in time that we are existing in is that, I mean, so we have the internet, which is amazing, right? And it's this huge hub of like, it's like the world's biggest library that you have access to at any given time, right? Whereas, you know, you used to have to enroll in fancy college and then you'd have access to their library and their, you know, great thinkers and professors. But what you're really seeing right now is the pace of change is outpacing the ability for a lot of sort of traditional education institutions to keep up with. So what skills, you know, the industry is asking for are not being taught. So this is a situation where actually going back to school and getting like a traditional computer science degree, it doesn't not have value, because I think there's sort of conceptual things that you learn and theoretical things that you would learn, but in terms of sort of most bang for your buck, and especially you know, making a career, you know, a pretty radical career change quickly, it's not the answer. And instead, what has kind of filled that vacuum is online courses. And there is the rise of sort of the boot camp model, which we're seeing in major cities in America. And then lastly, you've got sort of these more like smaller classes that are like workshops, something that's not as intensive as a boot camp, but also in person that you're seeing. But again, those things are limited to major metropolitan areas.
Yeah. So in case people watching aren't totally familiar with all those, I'm just going to explain them a little bit more.
Yes.
So a boot camp would be, I mean, just what I've seen, they could be something from 12 weeks to, you know, 8 months, but they're usually less than a year. And it's in person, and you normally would have to not have a job while you're doing it. You're just a full-time student. That's pretty common, right, Ada?
That's right. Yeah. So I would actually say that there are ones that are longer, but the majority of them fall into the 3 to 4 month range. That seems to be like sort of how they're standardizing themselves. And
sorry.
It's a full-time commitment, and they're expensive.
Mm-hmm. And I also get the feeling that you go into that knowing something like, I want to be a front-end web developer, you know. Like you come out trained for a specific job, and they really help you figure out job prospects when you leave. And then, let's see, we also talked about doing online classes. So I think from what I see online, those tend to be shorter. Like our Skill Crush classes are, the classes are about 3 weeks, and they would be bundled together into a 3-month kind of package. And they would fit around your schedule, that kind of thing. And then there's other options like monthly subscriptions for learning, where you can access a library of videos and tutorials and things like that, just for a monthly fee, but it's not on a schedule. It's just you have to, you know, set your own schedule for that. And then there are in-person things like a weekend workshop that's a couple hours on a Saturday and Sunday to teach a very specific skill. So those are just a couple of different models for learning that we were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I would say, you know, the people who are going to get the biggest bang for their buck out of the boot camp are the ones who want to make a really radical change, are ready for a sort of like very intensive period of time where they're going to devote themselves 100% to change, like getting a new skill set, and 100% could include moving to a different city. It's definitely what you're doing full time, so you're not working during this time period. And it really, like, it's not that you couldn't come out of these programs and do something other than exactly the job they trained you for, but it's really like, I would say, it's going to be the best fit for somebody who's like, yes, I want to be a Rails developer at a tech company. Like, you're going to get the most money or most out of sort of return on investment, because that's really what they're geared towards. So they're really about sort of pumping you into a tech company.
And it's kind of the most drastic option. Like, if you know you want to make a full career change and you know that right now, then if you can invest in it, that's something that makes sense for you.
Yeah, it's also the most structured option, which I think is important to take note of. So it's structured in all senses. It's structured like it's a very structured path and curriculum that you're going to follow. So it's a very set of things that you're going to learn, and the order in which you learn them is going to be also set. And then you're going to do that with the support of instructors and your peers as you go through the through the boot camp, which is good and bad, right? So, I mean, it's good in that, like, it's a really good way to learn, but it's bad in that, like, it's not sort of a tasting menu of what is out there in tech. It's sort of like, here is a very rigid curriculum that you're going to learn. And, of course, the thing with boot camps is they can be pretty expensive. So they can be like $10,000, $12,000. I think even like $18,000. And then online, as you were talking about, I think the big sort of the thing you have to think about is, how sort of self-motivated can you be? How comfortable are you Googling for answers? Like there are really, really great inexpensive options, but you're going to have to really rely on yourself to motivate yourself to keep up with it, because they are very much a self-serve model. So they're kind of, you pay, you go, you do it on your own time, etc.
Yeah. It's like a gym membership, right? You know, you want to go every month, but will you? You know, you have to be the kind of dedicated person who does.
Yeah, and there's people who do that, and that's great. I just happen to not be one of those people, so that doesn't work for me. And then there's sort of the middle, the sort of in between the two, online, where you have mentors and instructors and a more structured program and timeline and those things. And that's a little bit more where, Skill Crush falls. Like, we try to sort of get the best of both worlds. So it is more flexible and you don't have to move anywhere, but we try to provide a lot of structure.
Yeah. And I'll say that for me, it worked to kind of do both. Like, at first I took Skill Crush classes, and then once I had kind of been launched, I was able to start using a monthly subscription because I just had a starting point. So I think you don't have to just choose one of these and stick to that. There's a way to combine them.
I totally agree.
Your needs.
I think the same goes for weekend workshops. Like, I think sometimes it can be great to take a weekend workshop and especially go meet some people if that's available to you. Like, I do think to a certain extent trying a little bit of everything, except obviously the boot camp model is like you can't really test that out, but everything sort of on the less expensive range is a good idea to sort of figure out what works best for you. I think what works at one period of time is not going to be what works at a different period of time in your life. Yeah, I think though, if we're talking about budget, then, I think it's a couple different things, right? One is you have to think about, like, what you're going to get out of it. So the thing with the boot camp, like I was talking about, yes, they're expensive, but I, for example, have a former Skill Crush student who started with Skill Crush and then went on to a boot camp, and and then now she's up for jobs and she's negotiating with people, and she is looking to take a job that's $65,000, and that's double what she's ever made before. So she just doubled her salary by doing this boot camp. And yes, she had to put some money out for the boot camp, but not only is she going to make that money back in the first year, more than that, right? She's going to, I think, probably at least double the money back in the first year. She also has just set herself up for, like, now her base salary that she's working off of starts much higher, and therefore, like, her long-term earning potential is so much greater. So I think you have to take that into account. So yes, it's a lot of money, but if you have the money, I do think in most instances, and obviously if anyone's specifically thinking about a boot camp, it depends on the boot camp and all that, but I think you can get a return on investment. But again, the question is, do you have that money and do you want to commit that time and effort? But one of the big lessons I've learned from running my own business is it's really changed the way in which I think about investment of money, and I think there's different ways to invest money. Like you can invest money in a consultant and hire them to help you with something, or you can invest money in yourself and increasing your skill level. And I really appreciated running my own business because you start to have a much clearer sense of, okay, I spent money. Like when you're just living your life, you're like, I spent money and it just went away.
Yeah.
And then maybe if you're, maybe you bought a house and that's sort of like an investment, and maybe you're doing some stocks or something. So those are things that you buy that could potentially have a return. But when you're running a business, one of the cool things is that you start to really like be able to track, like, okay, I spent this amount of money, but look, I was able to generate this kind of income out of it. And I think just as like a normal day-to-day person, like at least I didn't think about college like that. Like I know that a lot of that is a way to think about college, but that certainly wasn't the way I thought about it. But this is just to say that I would caution people from, like, it's not that you sort of just want to spend your money willy-nilly, but I think that spending money to learn skills that can make you more money is a good way to spend your money. And you can make a lot of money quickly. Fast.
Yeah.
So.
And I think it doesn't have to be as drawn out as a college investment, It's like you spend so much money on college and then you're waiting half your life to see a return on it, or it feels like that. But, I mean, I took my first online tech class for, I think, $159, and then within a couple of months, maybe 2 months, I got my first client for $500. So I made back my money on my first job. And then so on the next class I took could be more expensive, and the next job I got was for more money. So I think depending on how you do it, the turnover could be pretty quick. You don't have to think like, okay, I'm going to invest $12,000 and then in 4 years maybe I'll make more money. It can be pretty instant depending on what scale you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also to a certain extent on you to make that return on investment work. And that's not always, it's not hard, but it takes a different kind of skill of like getting a client and figuring that out. But yeah, but I think that's the whole point, right? So.
Yeah. So, Ada, I know that some people are watching because they're thinking about these career changes and they're trying to decide on a Skill Crush blueprint to take because our classes are starting on Monday. So I think that our blueprints also can be kind of an example for other things, but let's just take a minute and talk about in general who our blueprints work out the best for if we're thinking about people who want to make big career changes or just have something on the side. So do you think you could just kind of talk through the designer and the developer and the WordPress blueprint and what people might be on the fence about? And then we can see if people have questions later too.
Absolutely. Yeah. So talking about this framework that we talked about of sort of, like, are you trying to make a radical change? Are you looking for a side kind of, or maybe you're trying to make a radical change, but you want to do that slowly. Are you looking for a side gig, or are you just sort of interested in dabbling? So for us, the blueprints are really geared towards those people who are looking to get some freelance work on the side and then to make a career change, but aren't looking for a huge radical career change right this second. If you're looking to do a big radical career change, a lot of the boot camps will expect you to have some technical knowledge, though. So I do think that, especially the developer blueprint, it would be a good fit for somebody who's considering a radical career change, because it is important that before you invest $12,000 that you know that you like coding.
Right, because in the developer blueprint, you're starting with Ruby at the end of the developer blueprint, and you might go into a boot camp needing to already have some of that experience. At least needing to know maybe HTML and CSS and that kind of thing.
Definitely, and I think most boot camps will expect that you have some kind of foundational understanding of what it is to program and what that looks like. So the developer blueprint is really designed for people who are thinking about making a career change, whether it is in the short term or the long term, and we really have focused it to get you up to speed on sort of the fundamentals of web programming, so HTML and CSS, which is everybody has to know, and JavaScript, and then also introducing you to a backend programming language, which in this instance we teach Ruby. The other two big ones that people write in for the web, although there's a bunch, but the sort of very popular ones are Ruby, Python, and PHP. So we teach Ruby. And then we also teach you Git and version control. And this is a little bit of a tasting menu of kind of like the core stuff that you have to know, and a little bit of experience with everything. And I think it's applicable to a lot of different situations, but especially for people who are sort of, you know, interested in coding and interested in what it means to be a web developer, but maybe a little bit intimidated or not really sure if it's a good fit for them. That's really the idea. That's really the audience that is a good fit for the developer blueprint. The designer blueprint is, so it's sort of for two audiences. It's one for people who are creatives who are interested in working on the web. So a common misconception is a lot of people think that we don't teach code in the designer blueprint, but we do in fact teach code. In fact, we teach HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, because those are just things that every person who works on the web really needs to know. But the first class in the designer blueprint is really about sort of the specific design principles of working with the web. So a lot of user experience stuff. You do learn Adobe Photoshop and sort of fundamentals of design, and it's really geared towards people who are a little bit more creative. It's also really great. We've had a lot of people who are print or graphic designers take that course, who have maybe the graphic design background and the print background, but really want to update their skill set for a more sort of modern, contemporary digital universe.
Yeah, and I think I've also seen a lot of people in the designer blueprint who are maybe working in a career that is around tech, so they don't necessarily want to change careers, but they want to know what everyone's talking about and be able to contribute. So I think we've had people who work in marketing and people who are photographers, just people who are around the tech scene a lot and want to know what's going on.
Absolutely. A lot of community managers, social media managers, stuff like that. Yes. Project managers, all of that. Absolutely. And that's exactly, it really starts you from like the very beginning of just thinking about the web conceptually and what is kind of this, like, what is the web all about and how do people interact with it, and then sort of builds you through the process of thinking through every aspect of a website design, which is visual, but it's also about the interactions and all of those things, and then actually executing on that design. Yeah. So.
And it's also, I mean, it's not just that the developer one is, it's not like you can only do the developer one if you want to have a tech job. Like, you could become a front-end designer after taking the web designer blueprint. It will just mean you do different things outside of class and set yourself up in a different way than somebody who maybe just wants to learn some more about tech but not change careers. So if you're wanting to get into an actual tech job, you just don't want to do the big heavy programming languages like Ruby or something, you could still do the designer blueprint and that would work for you.
Yes. And of course, although Ruby is technical, it's also really fun. So
it is. Everyone loves it.
And then lastly is the WordPress Blueprint, which we are just launching, which I'm super excited about. And that is really for people who are looking for a job where they either they're people who want to start a freelancing career. So I would say that WordPress is like, I mean, you tell me, like, how much have you used WordPress in your freelancing career?
I've used WordPress on every single one of my freelance projects. Yeah. So it's kind of like, if you want to freelance, you have to do it.
Yeah, especially if you're going to freelance on your own. I think that there's instances where you maybe could team up with another developer, like say you provide design and they provide development with somebody else, where you could get away with sort of not doing, but honestly, why do that when you could do it all? So WordPress is really for the people. I mean, you have to know HTML and CSS in order to do the WordPress blueprint. So if you don't know that but are still interested in the blueprint, you can just shoot us an email and we can figure something out for you, provide you some resources that you need. But it's really, so WordPress is really kind of like hit the ground running, start making money, let's like make this happen.
Yeah. And I think the reason it's so in demand if you're freelancing especially is because clients want to be able to update their sites on their own. I think it's really uncommon that people just want you to build them a website and leave it up there indefinitely. They want to be able to update things. So, and WordPress is a really, really popular way to make that possible. So that's the reason behind why it's so in demand.
Yes.
Okay. So let's just recap, and then do you want to take questions after that, Ada?
Sure.
So we talked through if you're thinking about making a big career change to kind of get set up to even start deciding what to do. So first you'd want to figure out your budget, how much money you need to make, and add on however much more you want to be making. So then you can just Google search and see what kind of jobs have salaries like that before you even do anything else. And then
I should
you
also add that that's something that we talk a lot about in the blueprints, is sort of like how much money designers make, how much money you can charge, what you can charge hourly for different projects, how you go about communicating that to clients, things like that.
Yeah. And then the second thing was deciding how big of a change you want to make. So at least for me, at first I didn't have any idea of what I wanted to do. So you know, you kind of think, do I want to do a couple of things on the side? Do I just want to get more technical to start with? Or are you certain you are ready to jump into a whole new job? The third thing is to figure out an area of interest that's in demand. And I think that you'll just figure that out by seeing what your coworkers are doing, kind of thing. Who gets hired to do what, I mean. And the fourth thing is making a learning plan that fits your budget and your time and your goals. So just figuring out, are you going to drop everything and start learning this new skill, or are you going to need to learn, you know, after everyone's asleep for an hour each night, and you'd have to do that online? Or is it something that you want to be very gradual by going to a couple weekend workshops every month, that kind of thing? Ada, do you have anything to add to it?
Just that I think it's just important to realize that you can do it. I think that even just a couple of weekend workshops or a class that you do at night or something like that it's a totally viable way to make a career change, and I think that you'll actually find that you'll be shocked at how much you learn and how quickly you can make that change, even if you don't have the money and time and ability to enroll in a boot camp.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to get into some questions? We have a lot.
Absolutely.
Okay. Rachel says, some of my tech skills are entry level. How do I market myself to employers, even for junior web developer positions, when many of them are asking for 1 to 2 years of industry experience?
So Rachel, this is a great question, and I think, I would say one sort of caveat is that or one thing to keep in mind is that employers kind of famously ask for more than they're willing to accept. So I would say that 1 to 2 years of industry experience actually means that they'd probably be willing to talk to someone who doesn't have that much experience. And so I think you should, first of all, just like, if you see that job description, you should just gung-ho go after it. And really what employers are going to be looking for is for you to be able to show some work. So you're going to want to make sure that you have a portfolio that has some work examples. And a lot of what employers do is because they understand, like, for example, I know when I'm looking at people's work that people often didn't have complete control over every aspect of the project. So let's say that you get some client and it turns out your client has like a weird orange fetish, and they make you do like everything in these like crazy orange colors, and you didn't really have a lot to say about that. So it's not. I don't think that you have to always be so concerned about like every project being perfect and pristine. I think instead you want to show that you have delivered projects, and then you want to be able to speak about those projects intelligently. And talk about the problems that you encountered. So lessons learned would be really important. And all, it's sort of, you know, you're more trying to sort of demonstrate how you think about something, because that's really going to be the best indicator of your ability to work and be a successful employee long term. Is your ability to learn on the job, deal with flexible, like, you know, changing, varying circumstances, all of that. So I think that if they're asking for 1 to 2 years experience and you are entry level, that's totally viable for you to land one of those jobs. And I think a lot of, and if nothing else, I would go in for a couple of those interviews and ask for feedback. If they don't take you,
Yeah.
ask them why. What are they looking for? And that can help guide you in terms of what you're going to learn next.
And one other tip I would add is that a lot of times I think when an employer wants only a few years of experience like that, maybe they don't want to have to initiate you into all the systems. So if you can show that, if it's a tech job and it's going to require you to use Git, if you can show that you already understand that and already understand some of the processes and different programs that you would use in the job, I think that might help them accept you without the years in another company.
I totally agree with that, yeah, and stuff like Basecamp or Trello. I mean, honestly, like if you just go and sign up for a free account for some of these things, like these are project management softwares that a lot of people use. I think, Randall, you're totally right. Like a lot of what people learn in the first 2 years of experience is not necessarily the technical skill, it's how to integrate, onto a team and workflow. So demonstrated knowledge of that will go a long way.
Okay, I'm going to give you another question. This one's from Tracy. As we learn new tech skills, what are some of the entry-level jobs we would be qualified for? Or if we plan to go freelance, what types of services will we be qualified to offer?
So this is a great question, and I think actually I'm going to ask you to help with this.
Sure.
So we actually just did a video about this, right? I'm like, I should make sure that I hit all the 9 jobs that we talked about that you can do, even if all you know is HTML and CSS. But so it really, so it runs the whole gamut. Like I think that a great thing for people to do right when they start is to build some sort of small personal websites for people. So like a portfolio site, a resume site. Randall's talked a lot about sort of how she's used WordPress for a lot of her clients, and that is because those clients have wanted to update their stuff regularly. But I think, I think it's totally legit to do some like $50 to $100 websites that are
like a resume page, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And I think that you really want to approach those as not necessarily like a way to make a salary, but they are a way for you to practice. They're a way for you to make some money back on the investment that you've made in your skills, and also maybe start the ball rolling in terms of learning about how to get clients, how to manage clients, how to you'll never know, right? So maybe somebody first asks for a microsite and then they end up being like, oh, but like, can't it have a blog? And you'll be like, oh, I can do that for you too. But and then of course, if you learn WordPress, you can start offering WordPress sites, and honestly, like you can make a huge business out of that. Like I mean, this is an area where the dollar range can go from like $500 to $1,000 for a WordPress site, all the way to $100,000 plus. I mean, if not more than that. So
yeah, and I would add that WordPress is it has so many features that even if you're just starting, you can do something. So I mean, I started my first project without that much exposure to WordPress, and it'll be kind of a crash course, but you can learn as you go and start doing more and more that WordPress is capable of as you learn more. So you can still start that if you're...
Totally. So I think that's you can sort of start with simpler WordPress projects that are maybe on the lower end price-wise, and then build it out to more high-priced projects. And then there's a bunch of stuff. I mean, so like being a project manager, if you have some tech skills, you become a much more valuable project manager. If you have some coding skills and can combine those with design skills, that makes you an insanely valuable. They call them unicorns, and it's exactly what you want to be. There's also a lot of jobs in QA, and that could be a great way to sort of build up your tech skills on the job. So in that role, your job is really to do testing. So you'll be testing software and finding bugs, but that can be a great way to sort of understand what are some of the things that come up and look at a lot of code and understand why things aren't working.
Yeah, I think another one that comes to mind is to be, if you can combine other skills you have, like say you have worked in marketing, you could become an email marketer, and you're doing HTML and CSS on email templates and that kind of thing. You can also, I think, work for a smaller company or an organization and be a general tech person. So if you know anything technical, you're going to be helpful to them, and then you can learn as you go, too. That would be a really good kind of job to get, just to get started, because you'll be the person that people go to for technical help, and so then you'll have to figure it out.
Yeah, I think, like, especially if you're interested in, like, working in the nonprofit sphere or in arts organizations or smaller businesses, that's really the case. So when you go to a big tech company like a Google or a Facebook, then things are really, really specialized. And there's like 100 people who only do databases, and 100 people who only do front end, and 100 people who just do user experience design, and another 100 designers that just do visual design. But when you're looking at smaller companies, like, one person has to do all of that stuff. So, yeah, and those, I mean, you're super valuable as somebody who understands, a little bit of marketing and a little bit of back-end development and a little bit of WordPress. That's exactly the kind of person those companies are looking for.
And then again, you can apply for front-end development jobs. You just have to really sell yourself as someone who learns quickly and has kind of you would have to have a lot of initiative, and I think prove that with projects and things. But you could get an entry-level job doing front-end web design.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to go to the next one. This is from Lydia. I dropped out of college and started working in network marketing, a decision I regret, but I learned a lot of skills I know I couldn't have learned in college. How does not having a degree play out for someone who wants to have a tech career?
So the question about college degrees always makes me laugh, because I literally had this moment the other day where I was like thinking about some of our employees, and I was like, do they all have college degrees? I don't even know, because, like, literally I haven't looked at people's resumes, because it just isn't, like, I don't know, it's, like, not on my radar of, like, things that I'm thinking about in the process. I think that there are instances, like, I mean, I do think that, sort of Google is famous for, like, only hiring people sometimes who have master's degrees, which I think is totally ridiculous. But I think that's sort of the luxury that you have when you're Google and everybody wants to work there. So there are absolutely instances where what degree you have and how fancy of a college you went to could be a factor. But for the vast, vast majority of companies, it's like, I mean, I've worked with people from all across the board, right? I've worked with people with PhDs, but I've probably worked with more people who don't have college degrees, or have high school degrees, honestly, but are super skilled. And it's like, it doesn't even, like, it's a non-issue. It's just, like, if anything, it was like a point of pride for the people who I knew who didn't have college degrees, and certainly for my friend who didn't have a high school degree, that he could do this job and make that amount of money. So
this
Lydia,
is the field for you.
Yeah. So Lydia, I mean, I don't mean to say that, obviously going to college and getting a college degree is a great thing, and it was a great experience for me, but I think that right now having skills and being able to prove that you have those skills is going to trump. It's like having the degree is not going to hurt you, but not having the degree isn't going to hurt you either.
Okay, I'm going to read a question from Joe. So how do you find out what customers in particular want? I mean, before you actually have the skills to do it for them, I guess, how do you find out what employers want? Is it just looking at existing job ads?
This is a great question, and I mean, it's both easy and hard, right? So yes, looking at job ads is really a great way to do it. I think that, like, what in terms of, like, we're sort of trying to think about, like, okay, how do we validate what we think the employers are looking for? Job ads is great. Indeed.com has some really interesting trend data. LinkedIn publishes data, like they do a yearly, top keywords in job ads and stuff like that, so that you can find some sort of reports on that. Some of them are really granular, so, there's, like, ones that are kind of like techie jobs are big, and it's like, okay, yay, we know that, but then it's like, okay, but really, like, what do I learn? I mean, I think there's some skills that everyone has to know if you want to work on the web, so HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, like, you can't go wrong learning those. Right now, I'll just tell you that JavaScript frameworks are super duper hot. So that's things like you'll see things listed like Backbone, Angular, Ember, JS. Those are all JavaScript frameworks. Node.js is JavaScript written on the back end. Anything JavaScript right now, basically. If you're going for a really techie role, is very, very hot. And then, so that's kind of if you're looking for like a full-time role at a tech company. In terms of clients, that is sort of, a little bit more like, okay, so if you are thinking about starting a freelance career and are thinking about like, who's going to be my client, what are they going to want, in those instances, you kind of have to like maybe beat the pavement a little bit more in terms of like going out and sort of, you could talk to people who who are working freelance and see what kinds of services they're offering. You could go talk to small business owners and see what kinds of stuff they're looking to hire for, what their needs are. With Skill Crush, we've obviously done a lot of customer development, as it's called. Sorry, what?
I was going to say that it kind of just takes a little research because it can be specific to where you live, too.
Yeah. What is your sense of, like, what people are looking for in Waco?
In Waco, I think I know a couple of people who make a lot of money developing WordPress freelance. And also, there's a lot of people here, since it's not a very technical town, but like I always think Waco is like maybe 5 or 10 years behind in terms of big development. So there are still companies who don't have a website at all yet. So people are sort of catching on like, oh, I need a website, but they want it all. Facebook scares them, Twitter scares them. So there are people here who have companies that will brand you into your social media and run your website. Basically the market here wants someone to just go, I'll fix it for you.
Totally. Yeah, on my side, I would say that, like I said, JavaScript is really hot in the New York, in the New York environment. People are really excited about JavaScript. Rails is always really fancy, and people want that. I think that similarly, there's a lot of small businesses that just need WordPress, so that's a super good skill to have. I also noticed that I feel like people tend to have a particularly hard time hiring good designers, so being good at web design is good. And then also showing expertise in mobile is really, really valuable nowadays. But I would agree with you that that's not necessarily something that you like only do. Like maybe you're an only mobile app developer, but most of the time it's really about sort of being a designer who understands mobile, or being a front-end JavaScript framework developer who also understands mobile, or being a WordPress developer who also understands mobile. So being able to sort of speak to the mobile aspect of things. And then I agree with you. I mean, it's funny because you say that about Waco, but I think to a certain extent, like that's everywhere. Like the more you can understand a little bit of everything, I mean, it's always good to be sort of really good at one skill, but it's also good to sort of understand the context of everything and be able to understand, the business implications of, a technical decision and stuff like that. So we're not that different.
Okay, I'm going to move on since we're getting a little short. This is Tisha. She says, I guess I'm a little fearful that the tech field is a bit saturated with newbies. Any thoughts?
I think that it's not. I mean, like, there certainly are there are a fair amount of people who are learning, but the thing is, like, the need is so great for technical people, and also the variation in need is so great. So both, like, there's so much need for it, and then, like you're talking about, right, like, there's businesses that still don't have websites, and that doesn't take somebody who's, like, really, really, really experienced to solve that problem. And in fact, like, really, really experienced people, that might not be what the problem that they want to solve, but that doesn't mean that that business doesn't have that problem, and then that problem isn't really acute, and that they don't, like, really, really, really need someone to solve it. So I think that so I don't think it's an issue. I think that you have I think everyone who has even a little bit of technical skills, there is such a big need for your skills and for more people with skills. And honestly, you're not going to be a newbie for very long. I mean, like, you're a newbie for a year or two, and then in this industry, you're an old hand. So
yeah, and I think that it's changing to the point where more and more people are expected to have at least some technical skill. So even if right now it feels like, oh my gosh, everyone and their mom is, trying to learn HTML, they probably should, because
Yeah.
it's changing.
It's also important to stress that, like, though you may be new at HTML and CSS, that doesn't mean that you don't have past experience that's super valuable that you bring to the table. So it's
Yeah.
like, yes, like you may have just learned how to do this, but like, for example, like you may have just learned how to build a website, but that doesn't mean you're not great at design or great at marketing and like, or copywriting or something. Like, I think it's like, it's important to recognize that like, you're not going to be new in every way. Like, you have tons of experience that you're going to draw on. You're an experienced professional. You're just adding this skill set that's going to sort of like, even like make your existing skill set even more valuable. So I wouldn't, yeah, don't get stuck in that sort of newbie mindset. Like, I don't have something to offer. I think you have a lot to offer. And it's just about sort of combining that with some tech skills to really supercharge.
Okay, I know it's 2:00, but there's just a couple of good questions. Do you think I can ask another one?
I think so.
Okay, this is Denise. I'm a project manager that works on a lot of web projects. I would like to be the doer instead of managing the teams. After I learn the tech skills, how do I transition from project manager to an entry-level web career? How do I get employers, including my current employer, to know that I want to do the hands-on job instead of staying in my senior-level project manager position? So this one's really about making a change, maybe in your current job, like getting your boss to see you as the tech person now instead of as the coordinator.
Yeah. So I think that this can be both the best way to do it and kind of the worst way. So in my experience, I have seen it often play out that often companies are so understaffed on the technical side that they are more than happy to train people. And actually, Emily, our lead developer, is a great example of this. And I actually, to be honest, like when I started the online magazine, I was a good example of this. And then Emily really has an even better story of that, where she actually started as an admin assistant at her job, and at her first development job, she was an admin assistant, and basically the developers had all these boring things that they didn't like to do, and she was like, hey, I'll help, and they were like all too happy to give her work to do. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I guess it's hard to, without sort of being able to ask you some questions, Denise, speak specifically to your situation. So I guess like my first question to you is like, I would just broach the conversation with your manager and feel them out and see if they're really resistant to it or if they're open to it. If they're really resistant to it, that's a little bit harder, and then I think it's a little bit probably about you kind of starting the process of learning outside of work. I'm sure, though, that doesn't mean that you can't talk to some of the people who you work with and ask them for some guidance about what to learn and how to learn it. Mm-hmm. I think, yes, sometimes people, employers kind of get stuck in thinking like, oh, no, but you're a project manager, like you can't be a developer. So it is possible that you're going to have to either start getting some freelance clients on the side to sort of, and then prove to your employer that you have those skills. And then, the other option, of course, would be changing jobs and taking a more technical role somewhere else. But I would just have an honest conversation with them. So.
Okay, I'm going to ask well, this one's really good. I can't stop. Okay, Rachel says, how would you approach a potential employer about the possibility of remote work? I want to work from home to have more time for my family. 10 plus hours in the office plus commute time won't work for me.
So I guess, Rachel, I guess you're talking about a situation where you're looking at a job that you want to do remote, but you don't think the person is necessarily thinking about it that way?
That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. So again, okay, so here's the thing, like, why you just want to think about, this is like, I feel like it's almost like you want to just like think about this as like a sales challenge. Like, you basically want to sell this employer on the fact that you working remotely is going to be better for them and not worse for them. Because I think the fear that people have with remote is that they think that if they're not watching you do the work, you're not doing the work. And my experience is actually that often I get more done when I'm remote, right? Because people aren't bothering me and asking me questions and interrupting me all the time. So I think there is like a real argument to be made. I think you just have to figure out how to make that to this employer. Explain that not having to commute gives you more hours to work, that you're more efficient, that, that you can contribute more, not less. And then I think it's a lot about, a lot of it is going to be then about sort of managing the remote work. And the biggest thing is just communication. So I think that being able to communicate before you start this position well about, what your goals are with being remote, how you're going to manage it is sort of like, it's a good like test case, like how open and communicative can you be with your employer about the plan, and then really following through on that. So that could mean like, starting every day by writing an email saying, this is what I'm working on today, and like I'm online. You might need to be on GChat or on HipChat so that you're available to chat any moment so that they can feel like, I think a lot of it is just going to be about managing your employer's feelings at first until they sort of get into the rhythm and come to trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that
understand.
being really available during the interview process, like suggesting video calls and answering emails really quickly can kind of make the potential employer see you as a person who's available, because I think they might worry that you just wouldn't answer or something like that.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think we have time for one.
Yeah, is that what you said?
Yeah, one more. So this is Malika. How is Skill Crush recognized or seen by companies? Are you accredited somehow, or do the companies know what your reputation is and that the skills learned here are legitimate? I'm one of those hardcore career-changing ladies.
So this is a really, really good question. And the answer is that we're not accredited. And it's actually interesting because I was at a meeting recently it was a sort of a mixed bag of people who run institutions like Skill Crush that are not accredited, and then people who are running sort of city colleges and stuff like that here in New York who are accredited. And they were all complaining because the problem is that the accreditation process, the way that they do it is that it's very long, and so the things that you can get accredited for are not like there's a total mismatch basically with what you can be accredited for in the state of New York and what the industry is wanting. So they really struggle with it at these city colleges because they want to teach different classes, but they can't get accreditation for those classes. So we're not accredited, and I don't know of a single boot camp that is accredited, although I know that in California and some of the more expensive boot camps, there is some oversight by the state of California, but I don't know a ton about that. But that said, I think the thing that you have to think about is that in these instances, it's not really going to be about, like, you should obviously talk about that you have completed this course and learned these skills, but the way that you're going to prove it is by work samples. And that's really the way that most employers are going to want to see it. And honestly, like, this is a really good example of like where people coming out of computer science programs often really struggle, because yes, they know all this computer science knowledge, but they often don't have anything to show for it, and they often have to do exactly the same work that you have to do to get the portfolio together. So it's really going to be about you taking the time to make sure that you do all the projects that we assign you and complete all the challenges and really build up a portfolio of work that you're going to be able to show your employers as proof that you do have the skills.
Okay, I think that's all you have time for right now. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I see that some people asked specific questions, and I'll try to get to those down in the comments after the webinar. Oh yeah, so for attending, we're going to send out a free worksheet that'll walk you through everything we talked about today in more detail, so you can look at your budget and the level of change you want to make and really conceptualize it. And after you get it, I would love for you to fill it out and then tweet us at Skill Crush about the career change you're wanting to make and how you're going to get there.
Awesome. I'll be tweeting.
Okay. Have anything to add, Ada?
No.
Okay, thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.